The next bit of advice I want to give you is instituting a call and a response, as well as be quiet symbols for your team. Let me explain what that means. Instituting a call and response is when I say something and I have them respond to get their attention. So for example, on one particular trip, our theme was being a world changer. I know, very late 90s, early 2000s. Very simple, but that was the goal. We wanted everyone to be a world changer. And throughout the course of the trip, we were talking quite a bit about the power of transformation and how the gospel transforms us, and we have the ability to now intervene in the lives of other people to transform them. This is a great privilege that we have to participate in the ministry of reconciliation. Well, as a way to reinforce this theme of transformation and being a world changer, we use the call and response. So whenever the crowd is talking quite a bit, I stand up or I get in front of the crowd and I would yell out, "World changers," and they would say, "Transformation." Again, a little bit cheesy, but it was very effective at getting their attention. There have been other times on trips where I've just used the word world changers. I yell world and they yell changers. If you have a large group, let's say 70, 80, 100 people on a particular mission trip, which is quite possible, it's really, really hard to get their attention. It's really hard to say, okay, everyone, be quiet, listen up, be quiet, listen up. It's very, very difficult. It's very easy if I can just shout one word, get their response. And then I train my team that when they say that word, they be quiet. That way I get their attention very, very quickly. You can do this if you have 6 or 7 people, or you can do this if you have 100 people. I've literally done this with a team of 12, and I've done this with a team of 200. In both cases, it worked very, very effectively. I shout something out, they shout something back. I get their attention very quickly, and I can then move on to the next thing. In addition to that, I can use a theme or something I want to remind them of. So every time we do it, it reminds them of the thing that I'm trying to drive home. The other thing you want to do in line with that is the idea of quiet symbols or be quiet symbols. You may be in moments, particularly during a travel process, where you need to get everyone to be quiet very quickly, and you can't just shout out. For example, if you're in an airport, you can't yell out, "World," and they yell back, "Changers." I mean, you could, but it might be a little bit awkward. So one of the things you want to do is implement a symbol. The typical thing I would always do is simply have my hand up like this, and then close my hand like this. And my guys know that when they see my hand go up, their hand goes up, and they do the same thing. And I always kind of jokingly say, okay, pretend that there's a string between your thumb and your chin. So if you're talking, and they're talking, and your hand goes up, all right, the string would pull your chin up. It would keep you quiet. I do this with people that are teenagers, and I've done this with people that are in their 50s and 60s. It works very effectively every single time. If I'm traveling with a group through an airport, or through a mall, or through a very chaotic ministry site in country, I can quickly just do this, and everyone looks at me. If they're having a conversation with someone else, and they can't see me, but the person they're having a conversation with can see me, I train them. If you're doing that, you just do this. They'll see that person does it, and then everyone will look back at me. So you can do whatever you want. You can come up with whatever symbol you want, whatever signal you want to use. Make sure whatever hand symbol you use is not offensive in the culture you're going to. There are some countries where certain hand symbols are very offensive. Make sure you check with your global partners or your contact. But if you can implement a call and response where you say a word and they respond back, or you can implement some sort of be quiet symbol, you can very quickly get everyone's attention and then move on to the very next thing. In addition to that, again, as I said earlier, you can use that as a way to reinforce specific themes. Do not go in the country trying to get everyone's attention by just asking them to be quiet. Hey, be quiet, hey, be quiet, hey, be quiet. It will be an absolute disaster. You will be frustrated the entire time. And quite frankly, if you're not willing to do this, you'll probably bring upon yourself more frustration than necessary. Institute a call and response and be quiet symbols. It'll make your life a whole lot easier. The next thing you want to do as you are leading your team on the short-term mission trip, you want to make sure you're doing intentional, quality in-country sessions. You want to make sure you are taking time out to debrief with your team every single day. Well, my teams, we wake up in the morning, we get going really early, we have a really long day, we're doing a lot of things. I want to make sure that we digest. At the end of the day, we get together, just 20 minutes, 30 minutes, it doesn't have to be long. Maybe if your team's really exhausted, you can abbreviate it down to 10 or 12 minutes. But just go around and kind of just debrief the day. Hey, what happened today? What did you guys learn today? What emotions were you feeling? What questions does that elicit? Just have moments where you are debriefing with your team. If you don't do that, the lessons they learn may not get drilled into their heart and mind the way you want, and they may end up forgetting that. Or they'll just do so many great things in the course of a day. Typically on a mission trip, you do way more on a mission trip than you do at home. By the time you get to dinner time, you forgot about things that happened in the morning. Those things felt like they were days and days ago. So to make sure you take time out to digest and process with your team. Some of the other really intentional quality in-country sessions that I want to be doing with my team are things like talking about missions, telling them, hey, what you can do when you get home. I want to be teaching them about things like how to pray for missions. I want to be teaching them how to mobilize for missions. I want to be teaching them how to give to missions, how to be involved in missions. I want to challenge them to think about being a part of global missions. Whenever I'm on a short-term trip, I recognize that the people on my team are open to listening to teaching that they may not be willing to listen to when they're back home with you. Things I like to talk about on mission trips are things like relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, relationships with our parents. I like to talk about relationships and how damaging they are to us and how they impede on our ability to be effective in ministry. So typically on my trips, we get up early, we do our ministry all day long, we come back for dinner, and then when we get home, after everyone's cleaned up and showered, we'll meet together, we'll debrief, and then I'll usually dive into some sort of teaching. Whether it's a discussion, or if I'm just preaching, or one of the other leaders are teaching on something, we're talking about topics that I know my team needs to hear, that they may not be willing to listen to when they get back home. There's something about being overseas, or being in a different culture, even if you're within your same country, being in a different location, something about it opens people up to listen to things that sometimes they're a little bit obstinate or stubborn about back home. So I want to capitalize on that. Again, I want to talk about things like missions and ministry and sacrifices, relationships, things like that. I also want to do Bible studies with them if possible. My team this summer that I led to the nation of Paraguay, we went through the Gospel of John. We went through the first 10 chapters. And we just read a chapter every day, and then we would get together and we would discuss it. We would talk about the things that we're learning from it, how it's challenging us, what we're learning on the mission field that applies to this. What are the things we're learning from the book of John and the mission field that are coming together, that are sort of coalescing around certain themes or doctrines that we think could transform our lives so that when we go home, we can be different. I want to take time out in country to have great moments of debriefing, great moments of teaching. Again, people's hearts and minds are open to things on the mission field that they might not be open to back home. I want to capitalize on that for their good and ultimately for the glory of God in their lives. Another thing I love to do when I'm on short-term trips that I love to encourage other leaders to do as well is to keep a team journal, or what I call a remember when list. Sometimes I do this in secret. Sometimes I do this with my team. You got to kind of do what you think is best for your team. Sometimes we have a team journal where literally we just have a notebook. Sometimes just a black and white composition notebook or something like that. And we keep it around. At the beginning of the trip, I tell everyone, listen, here's the team journal. If something cool happens, a great testimony, a crazy story, something takes place, take the journal and write it in there. We want to make sure we capture all of the memories. Sometimes, though, I don't do that. Sometimes I'll just do a remember when list, and I keep it to myself. I just write down all the things that happen. Every day, I'll write down 2 or 3 things. And at the end of the trip, particularly if it's a longer trip, I'll pull my team in and say, hey, remember when this happened? Remember when Billy did this? Remember when Sally led that woman to the Lord? Remember when Jimmy jumped off that roof and I almost went crazy? Remember that moment where we almost had a car accident? Don't tell your parents about that one. Remember that moment where that guy got healed? Praise the Lord. The reason I do this is because when you go through a short-term mission trip, they typically forget all that's gone on. So I want to remind them of all that God has taught them, all that God has done in them, and all that God has done through them. But the reality is there's going to be lots of things that I miss, but I try to be as exhaustive as possible when I'm creating that list. So keep a team journal or a remember when list. It'll be something that your team absolutely loves when you go through that at the end of the trip.